Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is the 24th of March, 2022. These are the stories that we will be discussing during the course of our show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the different resolutions that have been passed at the end of the two-day summit of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC. But we will be concentrating on the resolution number 9/48 POL that has been passed with reference to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It's more or less a 14-page resolution, and I have it with me here, and we'll be discussing the different points of that, and of course Pakistan's endeavors to highlight the atrocities that are being committed on the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, pertains to the latest situation as far as the Ukraine crisis is concerned. There is going to be a trio of summits of the G7, of the G20, of the G7 rather, the NATO and the European Union, that are going to be held in a single day, in which important decisions are going to be taken as far as the West's stance on this current issue is concerned. This is going to be our second story. Then we will be talking about Madeleine Albright, ladies and gentlemen, at the age of 84. She has passed away of cancer. She was also, she had the privilege rather of being the first US Secretary of State of the female gender. And of course, she became later a female populist pop icon as well. But of course, now she is no longer with us. We'll pay an obituary to her. Then we will be talking about the Minister for Planning and Development and Special Initiatives, Asad Umar Sahab, who has said that for the first time in 2 years, no COVID-related death has occurred in the last 24 hours. Also, the positivity ratio is at all-time low. Let's hope that this remains so. This is going to be our second last story, and of course, in fact, our last story, and then we'll be talking about an editorial, but that will be for the end of the show. Let's begin with our first story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the two-day IIOC Summit, the Council of Foreign Ministers Summit of the OIC, and important resolutions that were passed, in particular reference the resolution on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. More in the following report.
Pakistan has once again reaffirmed its solidarity with the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir by robustly advocating for Kashmir cause at 48th OIC Summit. In response to Pakistan's momentous efforts in prompting unified action of Muslim world against oppression of Kashmiris, OIC Council of Foreign Ministers has adopted an action plan on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The action plan envisages greater coordination among the member states on this outstanding dispute, such that the member states in their bilateral engagements with India will raise the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir dispute to advance a peaceful resolution in accordance with UN resolutions. Encapsulating the aspirations of Kashmiris, OIC Secretary General will also raise Kashmir issue separately in engagements with international, regional human rights organizations and various other interlocutors. The unanimous stance of Ummah crystallized in response to Pakistan's persistent stand against malicious Indian attempts to equate the just and legitimate struggle of Kashmiris for self-determination and liberation from foreign occupation with terrorism. Prime Minister Imran Khan, while delivering an impassionate keynote address at the inaugural session of OIC Summit, lamented that we failed both the Palestinians and people of Kashmir. OIC's principal stance for dignity and liberty of oppressed Kashmiri people represents silver lining in dark clouds of Indian occupation.
Now, to talk about this joint action on illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir by the OIC, we've been joined by two guests online. We've been joined by Hamza Ameer. He's an analyst and a journalist. Hamza, thank you very much to have joined us. And here in the studios, we've been joined by Hamid Khan Al-Mushriki, who joins us in the studio after a very long hiatus. Hamid, thank you very much to have come to the studios for this program. Let's begin with Hamza. Hamza, not only was this 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC extremely important for reuniting all the different important leaders from the Muslim world, but also the different resolutions that have been passed. But here we'd like to concentrate on the resolution that was passed on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. How important in this current geostrategic, geoeconomic, geopolitical situation is this resolution?
Well, thank you, Umar. Firstly, I would say that it is for Pakistan's credit that in a situation of a political almost turmoil kind of a situation in the capital Islamabad, the Pakistani government has actually managed to hold successfully a very successful OIC's Conference of Foreign Ministers, which actually tells a lot about how Pakistan stands when it comes to the OIC member nations and as a founding member of the OIC. The resolutions that have been passed on Kashmir hold great value because the concerns of Pakistan on Jammu and Kashmir were echoed by the General Secretary of the OIC as well, and at the higher platform as well. So I think this is about time because see, OIC is happening at a time when Pakistan's resolution was also seconded at the United Nations on Islamophobia, and a day has been marked on that. So in that context, I think it's about high time that OIC and also Pakistan itself increases its diplomacy and awareness on the ongoing atrocities of the Muslims of Jammu and Kashmir and the kind of brutality that India is practicing in Jammu and Kashmir, because this is about time that Pakistan's relevance would be even much more important in the region, and at the same time being the voice from the OIC's platform for the Muslim world, because this is very important. OIC, as our Prime Minister said, that OIC has not done enough and we've failed the people of Kashmir and Palestine. It is very true. It's harsh, but it is true. But it's about time that when the United Nations can recognize the presence of Islamophobia, then they certainly can look into, with the same reference, into Kashmir as well.
I totally agree with you on that, Hamza. Hamid Khan al-Mashriqi. The Indians have been crying foul since the last 2 days, since the OIC Summit started, particularly because Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir has been on the agenda, and now that the resolution is passed, they are crying hoarse on all the different channels. You who go regularly on the Indian channels, what is your point of view on the Indian feedback on this resolution, and how important do you feel this is going to be for the future of the Muslim Ummah as well?
Thank you very much, Omar. It's always a pleasure to be here. Omar, to be honest, the one thing you said, I'm really laughing what Indian channels are doing, what Indian media is doing. They are screaming, they are moaning, they are trying to pretend that Pakistan has taken over for its own agenda. No, as a matter of fact, that Pakistan has managed to bring Kashmir issue as one of the main highlights of this 48th session of Foreign Ministers or Muslims Conference. And this is a great success of Pakistan. And not only the General Secretary has clearly mentioned about atrocities in Kashmir, rather we have seen that many of other foreign ministers have mentioned Kashmir as well. And it shows that now Pakistan is in the position of leading the Muslim Ummah, not only for the matters of Afghanistan or Palestine, also Kashmir. And Pakistan is the one who has initiated all that efforts towards the pressurizing India now for the resolution of Kashmir issue according to the resolutions of United Nations. And if you look into this statement, there are two very significant points in this resolution 9/48. One is that all the Muslim countries will talk about the Kashmir issue during their bilateral talk with India, not only on the platform of OIC, rather if they have any economical talks with them, whether any of the foreign minister is visiting India or India is visiting to any of the Muslim countries, they will be a kind of bind to talk about Kashmir, talk about the peaceful resolution of illegally occupied Indian Kashmir. And this is a very great success. On the other hand, now when they will come for their economical benefits, India will try to get the economical benefits from the Muslim countries. Now Muslim countries will have an agenda of Kashmir as well. And I believe that Pakistan should carry on with the connections with the other Muslim countries and force them to follow the resolution, and they will be able to pressurizing India. And one thing which is very important, that this OIC summit was so called that they are not very much in control, or they do not have that much say in the world. No, we have seen within last 3-4 months Pakistan has successfully has condemned this second session. We organized first about 3 months ago about Afghanistan. This was a general perception that this might be only for the Afghanistan issue, no, Pakistan has told that this is a regular 48 session which will talk about all the Muslims' problem. All the problems will be on the agenda, and obviously the Kashmir issue is highlighted and is the most important issue. And if you will look into it, the Indian media, Indian government and Indian diplomats, even they are in trouble now. They are talking about it. They are saying that Pakistan, we were trying to isolate Pakistan according to the Modi's last
when
2-3 years.
in fact their actual intentions have been unearthed. Hamid
Yes.
Saab, I'll continue talking to you, but let's go back to Hamza. Hamza, I'd talk about the first 2 points that are on this resolution, that is 9/48 POL. The OIC reaffirms support for the legitimate struggle of the Kashmiri people for realization of their inalienable right to self-determination and freedom from Indian occupation. This is the first point. The second, that it declares that the final settlement of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute should be in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions and the United Nations supervised plebiscite. This is indispensable for peace and stability in South Asia. I'd like your comment on these 2 points.
Omar, hearing you read through those lines, doesn't it ring a bell that we'd hear this every now and then?
Of
on
course,
every
that is so
possible-
true. That's why I'm asking.
And that is the harsh reality that, every time these statements keep coming back over and over and over again. What I would like to suggest is that, at a time, India's contention in these days has been that while Pakistan and the OIC Summit actually is talking on Kashmir and to address the matter, the delegation of for economic agreements from the United Arab Emirates is in India, and they're actually planning on investing a lot of money into Kashmir. So they basically were trying to counter that. Now, my point is that instead of opting to the same resolutions and terms that are referred from the resolution itself, obviously that is the principal stand. But Pakistan's diplomacy and the OIC's diplomacy needs to increase. That when we say that we are going to be talking on these lines on bilateral agreements or bilateral terms with any country we talk to, and with reference to the Muslim world, this needs to be implemented and seen that it is being referred to as well. Because
but
it
you know,
cannot
Hamza,
be
that
left
only
to
time will tell whether all the points of the resolution, including the talking about IIOJK during mutual discussions with India or any other country, will be actually seen or not. It will come out in the statements, after these talks, whether this issue was discussed or not. So, only time will tell, Hamza. That is all I can tell you. But nevertheless, I saw, because I was there at the OIC Summit, I saw a lot of positivity emanating, a lot of, unison as far as the different points of concern were there. And of course, you saw the impassioned speech of Prime Minister Imran Khan. I'd like to take your comment, and I'll take Hamid after that. Hamza, when the Prime Minister says, and you yourself said, that we have failed Palestine, we have failed Kashmir, what needs to be done now? If I were to concentrate on Kashmir now, what should be done by the Muslim world? Pakistan has been doing whatever it can, but what can the Muslim world do? We know that a lot of countries, like you yourself have said, the UAE and other countries are very close to India. So what should be the future strategy?
Omar, I think that the way forward for Pakistan and the OIC countries is taking a reference every single time to the biggest achievement that Pakistan has achieved. That is a resolution on Islamophobia, a day marked to recognize Islamophobia's presence in the world, which is basically condemned. So that is something that Pakistan can actually take a hand from and refer it every time it mentions Kashmir, because this is exactly what is going on in Kashmir. It is a brutality going on in an attempt to change a Muslim majority state into a Muslim minority state, as our Prime Minister also very rightly stated. So I think that can be a stepping stone moving forward. When Pakistan's voice can be heard on Islamophobia, it certainly can use the same reference to bring up Kashmir every now and then at every platform possible, and urge the OIC countries as well to join together and bring this Islamophobia to Kashmir and put that up, so that the world should be compelled to actually debate on this matter and not just keep a closed eye when they talk about India and the issue of Kashmir.
All right, Hamid, will the world be compelled to translate all that has been said at the OIC, has been written at the OIC, and of course be translated into implementation? That is, the key word, implementation. You see the different United Nations resolutions, exactly, Hamid, and you don't see any action on all the resolutions that have been put forward on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir.
Umar, there is, I mean, although, I mean, I agree with Hamza that, I mean, there needs to be talk, there needs to be, you know, see what implementation we can do or other Muslim countries will do. But I have one very good suggestion at this time when Pakistan is in a leading position of Muslim Ummah, that Pakistan should try to present a resolution in United Nations General Assembly, similarly like we passed this resolution about Islamophobia, that there should be one resolution about the Kashmir issue right now, supported by all these 52 members of United Nations countries who are Muslim countries. And if Pakistan will manage to get the support from Muslim countries in United Nations openly, then there is a very high chance that that resolution will not only be passed, but that resolution should have impact of further sanctions on India if India does not follow the resolutions passed by United Nations for the last 74 years. Because this is the time, this is the ideal time for Pakistan and rest of the Muslim Ummah to pressurize India on the platform of United Nations and European Union as well. But in United Nations, I mean, with the 52 Muslim votes, Pakistan have a very good chance to be able to have some kind of sanctions, resolutions of sanctions on India. And if Pakistan will be successful in it, trust me, this matter not only will be highlighted in the world, rather that India will be in trouble and India will have to think about the resolution of the Kashmir issue with the wish and the will of the people of Kashmir, not with changing the demography, not with issuing the 3 million domiciles, not with selling the lands to the Birlas and Tatas and others in India. So the Indian government have to come to the solution with the will of the people of Kashmir. And we know that the people of the Kashmir, as even Farooq Abdullah said, that now this is the time that people of Kashmir will rather go with China or any other country than living with India. So you can imagine that what atrocities are going through in Kashmir, Indian illegally occupied Kashmir.
Of course. Hamza, we have seen countless resolutions in the United Nations. Even if, in your point of view, I would like your take on it. What Hamid has said, I'd like to take that forward. If, for example, the United Nations, a resolution is proposed in the United Nations by the OIC, by the Muslim countries, and it is eventually passed, will it have any impact on India? Will it be able to pressurize India? What's your take on that? Because the fact remains that there are previous resolutions on the same issue as well that have really not taken any, have been translated in fact into any tangible action in the region.
Well, Omar, I think that, one important part from the OIC's conference is the presence of China. It was a special representation, exactly. But it was very important because
and he's going to go to India as well after Afghanistan.
Yes, and China's say on the matter at the United Nations is felt much more strongly than any other stronger country in the world. And I think if Pakistan can actually use China's partnership to actually present the case forward and then use the support of the Muslim countries to actually stand with Pakistan and the overall resolution on Kashmir and tell the United Nations to not only give a rhetoric statement but also to sanction India. When it regards to its ongoing war crimes, as I would say, in Jammu and Kashmir. So something that that can be thought about as a diplomacy attempt for Pakistan. And not to forget, if the United Arab Emirates is there, and Pakistan certainly can share this resolution with them because they are part of OIC. And if they can actually take the lead forward, then that can be a first step forward because India needs to feel the heat, Umar. They don't feel the heat when we talk at the OIC.
I agree with you on that. I agree with you that they don't feel the heat, but the heat needs to be felt, and through resolutions such as these that has been passed by the OIC, because the resolve is there. If that resolve can be pushed further, maybe some change could happen as far as the current status of this disputed region is concerned. Thank you very much, Hamza, Ameer, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this very important resolution that has been passed on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir by the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC. I'll come back to you, Hamid. Now, what's your take on that? The fact remains, Hamid, that there are a lot of question marks when it comes to the implementation, the putting into action of the words that have been so strongly said at different fora, including now at the OIC. What's your take?
Umar, when you talk about the effectiveness of any new resolution, I would say that we have to look into it that when was the last resolution passed against India in the United Nations? It is about 3 decades ago, in 80s. So now the time has changed. Now, if there is any new resolution comes into the United Nations General Assembly, there will be a pressure on India. There will be definitely a pressure on India. Now, on the other hand, as Hamza is mentioning as well, that Pakistan is very good friendship with not only with China, Russia is on our side as well. So this is the ideal time for us to enforce and to push India to for the reasonable resolution of Kashmir issue, which is with the will of.
But Hamid, you remember the resolution that was passed on Islamophobia in the UN? Yeah. It was opposed by India, it was opposed by the EU, and it was opposed by France. Yeah. Do you think the OIC can somehow pressurize not India, but at least the European Union to come on the same terms as far as this
I always say that, unfortunately, it's only Pakistan who's highlighting, human rights violations and atrocities in Kashmir. If rest of the Muslim world will be shoulder to shoulder with Pakistan to highlight the atrocities in Kashmir, I'm sure the European Human Rights Commission will definitely have to talk about it. They will have to look into it. The only thing is that we need to highlight it more, and it is not only from Pakistan's platform. That is the only thing, because they think that Pakistan maybe is only a party in it. That's the only problem. So if they will get the evidence from the other resources, from China, from Russia, from Muslim countries, even from so many other we have other non-Muslim countries where they will support us. Even I have met with British parliamentarians, James Daly and others. They are Tory member of Parliament, and he is heading one of the Kashmir committee in British Parliament, and he is so much convinced that it is Indian illegally occupied Kashmir, and India has to make a resolution and resolve this issue. Otherwise, they know that this is a nuclear flashpoint. So wherever Pakistan can convince its case, Pakistan needs a support from other Muslim countries.
That is the key question. That is the key point. Pakistan needs support. It cannot do everything on its own, Hamid.
Absolutely
it needs the support. Okay, here we have the support of the Muslim world, but now we need to see translated into action. We also need the support of other friendly countries like China. That was here. Mr. Wang, he was here, and he has he understands the Pakistan's perspective. He understands the atrocities of the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Russia is engulfed in crisis right now. But apart from that, there are other countries also that could facilitate Pakistan or help Pakistan support this.
And all those countries who claim that they are the protectors of human rights, right? All those countries, it is liability of those countries to look into the reality of Kashmir. Like that Whitestock company of Britain, the legal
law
company,
firm,
law firm, they gave over 2,000 evidences of atrocities in Kashmir. 2,000 evidences. Right, and undeniable evidences. So what else? They could look into. So the matter is that.
But UNHRC also has taken out two reports on the Kashmir issue. But again, where are those reports? What are we seeing out of them?
I agree with you, but this is like a continuous process. There is only two ways. One, I always say that instead of Pakistan being in FATF, India is the one who should be in the
blacklisted,
FATF.
In fact, not only blacklisted.
It should be in the blacklist. On the other hand, if you look into the violation and if you look into the level of democracy and freedom of speech, India has gone worse since last 7 years. Modi regime is not letting Amnesty International work there. Modi regime is not letting, what the other country, so many other NGOs are not allowed to work.
And there are so many NGOs and organizations, human rights organizations, Hamid, that are talking about it. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the Genocide Watch has recently said that what is happening in illegal Kashmir is like going towards genocide.
And then they were not even allowed to enter in Indian occupied Kashmir. They were not even allowed. And do you remember in 2019 January, they did not even allow Rahul Gandhi to go to Kashmir in Srinagar.
And speaking of him, let's even forget the politicians. Let's talk about the journalists, Rana Ayub. Let's talk about the other journalists that are continuously persecuted because they tried to speak the truth.
Yes, Rana Ayub. Then there is a very good researcher from Oxford, Suraj something, and he's saying the same thing, that they have made Kashmir like a biggest prison in the world. That everybody has to go through the government's permission and procedures, which means that they just have to talk about what Indian body government is saying, and that government is a fascist government. They just want their narrative to be.
But Hamid, what is really amazing on the part of the world is, despite the world knowing that this is a fascist government, despite the world knowing that the person behind the Gujarat massacre is now the Prime Minister of our not so friendly neighborhood country, despite the fact that the whole BJP, the whole saffron politicism is now rampant all over India, there is no hue and cry from across the world. But when a small incident occurs elsewhere, they are the first to talk about.
We have seen in the Ukraine crisis. 3 million people, and they're making it the world's biggest crisis after World War II. And I always say such a discrimination from the rest of the world.
I mean,
They
that
did not see
Rohingya
about the
Muslims,
Syria.
Palestine, there's so many issues concerning
They
Muslims.
did not see the migrants from Syria, they did not see the migrants from Yemen, they did not see the migrants from Afghanistan or Iraq. So this is, unfortunately, this is the hypocrisy of the Western world. But as we know that we have to live in this world, we have to keep exposing India, we have to keep explaining them what India is doing in Kashmir, and we want make world to understand that if they will not resolve the Kashmir issue, if there is any war in between India and Pakistan, they have seen the war of Ukraine and Russia, devastating war. Can you imagine the war between two nuclear countries? This is the point when Pakistan needs to explain the United Nations, the Western world,
Hamid, it's
and
not
America.
Pakistan that needs to explain, it is the Western world that needs to
Exactly,
understand.
understand.
Pakistan
I
has
agree
tried
with
to
you.
explain
I
it
agree
on the
with you.
different fora
I agree
since
with
so
you.
many years, Hamid. It is
I
time for the
agree.
world, for the Western world especially, to comprehend and to understand and to react in the same vein on
and
that.
that's why I say that Pakistan needs the support from other countries.
Yes,
To-
it already has the support of the
Yes.
OIC, and the
OIC,
Muslim countries.
China,
Yes,
other countries.
that
Once Pakistan will have the support from other countries, I'm sure that it will have much more weightage.
Inshallah, we wait for the best to come in the months to come.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much, Hamid
My
Khalid
pleasure.
Mashtiki, to have joined us.
My pleasure.
Senior analyst talking to us about, of course, this resolution number 9/48 POL that has been passed on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Let's come to our second issue, and that concerns the crisis as far as Ukraine is concerned. And there is a development that there is going to be a one-day trio of NATO, G7 and EU summits that is going to be attended by US President Joe Biden. Syed Muhammad Ali, Foreign Affairs Analyst and Strategic Affairs Director at CAS, joins us online. Thank you very much, Ali, to have joined us. Ali, we see a lot of development, but is it really in the right direction?
Thank you so much, Omar. I think the situation is becoming more serious on the Ukraine conflict because three dynamics are very clear now. First, that it's been almost 4 months since the Russian intervention started. And whatever the Russian objectives were, do not seem to have timely materialized, number one. Number two, I think the Ukrainian military's capacity seems to have been underestimated. Number three, I think the international Western response that has been rallied in the diplomatic domain, in the media domain, in the economic domain, and now also through very significant military reinforcements of the Ukrainian military, and also the arrival of private military contractors and volunteers from across the world within Ukraine is also a very serious dynamic. And I am worried that this frustration and the inability of Russia to quickly achieve its political and strategic objective could force it to escalate things further, not just vertically, but also, I hope I'm wrong, beyond Ukraine as well. So this is a very critical situation right now.
Let's speak about NATO, Ali. The only reasoning that the whole crisis erupted was because Russia did not want, it wanted assurances from the West that Ukraine is not going to be part of this alliance that is known as NATO. Now, there has always been talk of NATO extending itself towards the eastern part of the world, and this is just an example of that. Do you feel that if the West agrees for Ukraine not to become a part of NATO, that will things de-escalate, or do you feel that things are at this moment at a point of no return?
I think my modest assessment is, unfortunately, I do not see things de-escalating. In fact, I see the conflict expanding in different domains simultaneously beyond the military contest which is afoot right now within Ukrainian territory. I see more aggressive international diplomacy being used by the West. I see an intensification of economic coercion and isolation from the West. I also see greater and more substantive military reinforcement in terms of thousands of anti-tank missiles and surface-to-air shoulder-fired missiles like Javelin and Stingers being provided to Ukraine. And also I have heard credible reports of more than 16,000 volunteers arriving in Ukraine to reinforce the Ukrainian military in what looks like a long-drawn urban warfare, which I think the Russian military will have to face in the coming days.
Talking of economic implications, Ali, we are already seeing the brunt on oil and all gas. What other economic implications do you foresee as far as this crisis is concerned?
I think that is the global impact of this conflict, clearly, because all the countries, including Pakistan, including the US, including India, including China, have been affected because of the rising prices of oil, the highest in the last 8 years. And I think the developing world is going to be really badly hit because it will affect their budgets, their balance of payment, and the cost of living expenditures, which is already affected by the COVID crisis. However, in terms of the great powers like the US and Britain, they are trying to assure countries like Germany and Netherlands, which are dependent on the energy supplies from Russia, to find alternative sources of energy. That's why the Middle Eastern countries become very important, whether the Arab countries will be able to increase the oil production in order to manage the gap which has been created in the supply of energy to the Western European countries badly hit by the sanctions on Russia. However, it is also important, in fact, the JCPOA agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, Omar, is also affected because that explains why West is keen on reviving of JCPOA, including the US, so that Iran can be encouraged to increase its oil and gas production to address the rising oil prices in return for nuclear constraints that it has earlier committed.
So as a result of this crisis, Ali, are we seeing in this whole multipolar global scenario new alliances being formed?
I think that's a very important question, Umar. I think there are two trends. First, this crisis is testing the sincerity, commitment, and credibility of the existing alliances, number one. Number two, it is also creating new opportunities for other countries. But thirdly, it is also creating new challenges for these alliances. I'll give you a specific example. For example, US and Britain expect the Arab countries to compensate for the drop in the oil supply brought about by sanctions on Russia. But I don't see the Arab countries very forthcoming in meeting this US expectation. In fact, I think the foreign minister of China also met the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia during his visit in Islamabad. And I think China is also trying to reach out to the countries which have been traditionally very close security allies of the US. So that is also a new dynamic. And thirdly, I think the countries which heavily depend on the US for security assurance, which includes Ukraine, Omar, are really worried because it has also tested the degree of US commitment to meeting their security needs, despite being, allied with them.
Speaking of allies, my last question to you, Ali. On the one hand, we have the side that is totally backing the Western perspective, the US perspective, the EU perspective. Then we have the side that is totally backing the Russian perspective. Then you have countries such as Pakistan and China that are quite neutral and have mentioned that to both the sides and are trying to bring about some kind of solution to this issue. Which side will reign supreme in your point of view?
But I'll try to give a simple answer. I think the Russian advantage on the battleground of Ukraine is clearly in the conventional military domain. But the Western alliance clearly enjoy a far greater global advantage in economic, in media, in diplomatic, and also soft power domains. And this is a global hybrid warfare which is being waged between Russia and the Western world and the Western alliance, which is asymmetrical. While the Russian strength is in conventional might, conventional military might, the West is trying to impose and cost on Russia through economic coercion, through diplomatic isolation, through psychological warfare, through its huge advantage in the media domain. That's why you hardly see a Russian perspective on this war in the international media, which is dominated by the Western perspective. So I think gradually maintaining, costly military operations and justifying them both internationally and domestically will be a more difficult challenge for Russia.
So many different challenges, Ali, that I totally agree with you. And it's an extremely complex situation that is becoming more complex by each day that passes. We can try to remain optimistic on the current scenario that we are seeing on Earth. But the fact remains that countries that are directly involved in this scenario, in this crisis, need to come to talks. There has been one round of talks. Let's hope the second round of talks becomes more conclusive. Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali, Foreign Affairs expert, Director Strategic Affairs, CAS, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the latest situation emanating from this crisis. And of course, this one-day trio of meetings of the NATO, G7 and EU countries is going to be very important in understanding where the West wants to go as far as this crisis is concerned, whether there is some kind of a leeway, some kind of possibility of talks or negotiations or not. Let's come to our last three stories very, very quickly. The first is, of course, sad news of Madeleine Albright, the first US female Secretary of State who has passed away at the age of 84 from cancer. She was born in former Czechoslovakia in 1937, nominated to be the first female Secretary of State and confirmed unanimously in 1997. She remained at that post till the year 2001. She, as per her talks that we have all heard in the past, and they are available on YouTube as well, was a tough talking diplomat. She was in an administration that hesitated to involve itself in one of the biggest political crises of the 1990s, the genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia and Herzegovina, but she did get involved in it. She wanted a muscular internationalism. This was said by a former senior advisor to Madeleine Albright. She did say some controversial statements, but then of course also said that she was sorry that she did talk about that, especially in context with the invasion on Iraq. Nevertheless, this becomes history, what happened in Iraq, and Madeleine Albright was there when it happened, and now she's no longer with us. May her soul rest in eternal peace. Then we'll go to Pakistan and COVID-19 and the fact that Asad Umar Sahab, who is of course the Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives, has said that for the very first time in 2 years, no COVID-19 related death has been reported in the country in the last 24 hours. The positivity ratio is also below 2% since March 9th, when a 2.07 positivity ratio was recorded. It's a good sign, it's a good omen. Let's hope it sustains, and let's hope for its sustenance, we need to follow the SOPs and continue to remain vigilant. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk about what a lot of people have been talking about, and that is Afghanistan and girls' rights to education. Now, the Taliban government, ladies and gentlemen, has had said that it's going to open the schools for girls. In the beginning, it was going to open. Then it said it is going to have a segregated system of education. Then what happened was that the schools opened and they were closed immediately afterwards. This creates a very negative perception of what the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government are aiming for as far as girls' education is concerned. When the entire world, including the West, is aiming for human rights in Afghanistan and for women and girls' rights in Afghanistan, and the Afghan government and the Taliban government know that as well, because that was one of the preconditions in the Doha talks as well. Nevertheless, what is important to see and to follow up by the Afghan Taliban government is that we hope that it is just a little pause before they restart this whole education system, because as we all know and has been said by the Afghan officials as well, that there is a lack of teachers and professors as well for this education system. Let's hope that gap is filled very quickly and that we see some positivity emanating as far as girls and women's education is concerned. And of course, the world is looking towards Afghanistan. Afghanistan is going through a crisis. I hope that they understand the complexity of the situation, and they understand also that women's rights and girls' rights to education is as important as their boys' rights to education. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow, same time, same place, with new subjects that pertain to you, us and Pakistan. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz.